7 years ago, on July 13th of 2013 to be exact, 3 black feminists used the media attention given to the death of Trayvon Martin, a young black man, as a springboard to launch the Black Lives Matter organization. Martin was killed by George Zimmerman, who was a neighborhood watch organizer at the time, during a physical altercation in Zimmerman's neighborhood. The 3 feminists insisted that Zimmerman's acquittal on the charge of murder reflected racism against black people by white people, even though Zimmerman, whose mother is from Peru, is of Hispanic descent, a not insignificant sleight of hand that the public has been willing to overlook to this day. And this is not the only sleight of hand employed by the founders of Black Lives Matter. We shall see that in fact they are not concerned about the welfare of black men at all, but are nothing more than yet another feminist group. The name Black Lives Matter was consciously selected by the founders in order to usurp the moral high ground. To a simple-minded observer, this name implies that anyone who criticizes the group is suggesting that black lives don't matter, which is nonsense, of course. This same tactic was used by the anti-abortion lobby, calling themselves pro-life, and their opponents dodged this slippery trick by calling themselves pro-choice. The fact is that Black Lives Matter is not a phrase or statement. It is first and foremost the name of a movement and an organization. And the sad truth is that the overwhelming majority of people in our culture will not look beyond the phrase at the behavior of the organization. So this trick is inordinately effective. But let's look at what Black Lives Matter actually stands for, because, quoting the biblical verse, "Beware of false prophets, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits." Black Lives Matter is not who they say they are. Feminists are adept at creating niche groups within feminism, and then applying their generic ideology of man-blaming to raise funds for the niche at hand from which they can draw a healthy salary. The subgroups that feminists have created include ecology, which is ecofeminism, Christian feminism, trans feminism, lesbian feminism, and even financial feminism. None of these feminist groups contribute anything valuable to the niche that they colonize. They are only there to profit by vilifying men and hopefully creating a name for themselves within the global feminist syndicate. The women of BLM saw not a tragedy but an opportunity in Trayvon Martin, and their behavior has been consistently opportunistic ever since that day. Find a tragic story about a black man, claim that white supremacy is to blame, and then fundraise. In fact, a quick look at a timeline of the rise of BLM shows a stream of dead black men, including Eric Garner, John Crawford III, Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald, Freddie Gray, and many others. And yet we shall see that the BLM movement itself seeks to perpetuate the very problems that led to the death of these black men. Here are the 3 feminist women who openly declared their prejudice against the very men that they use to promote their very lucrative business, and I'm going to explain how and why they do this shortly. Patrice Kahn-Coolers, a co-founder of BLM. She calls herself an artist, an organizer, and a freedom fighter in Los Angeles. Coolers is married to Janaya Khan, who appears to be a lesbian female, although the sites that I found, including Wikipedia, do not identify her gender. Janaya Khan is also co-founder of BLM Toronto, the group made famous by Yusra Kogali, whose famous racist tweet, quote, "Please Allah give me strength to not cuss/kill these men and white folks out here today. Please, please, please," unquote. And the other famous quote, "Whiteness is not humanness. In fact, white skin is subhuman. These quotes earned her Toronto's Pam MacDonald Women in Leadership Award. Next, we have Alicia Garza. Alicia is married to Alicia Garza, a white woman who identifies as a transgender man. Alicia insists, quote, "We must view this epidemic through a lens of race, gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity," unquote. And yet she is completely unconcerned about the fact that the majority of the blacks killed are in fact cis heterosexual males. Next we have Opal Tometi, and she's a co-founder of Black Lives Matter as well. And based in New York, she calls herself a Nigerian-American writer and strategist and community organizer. Opal is married to a white man whom she accused of being racist. In an article in Untitled magazine, she says that after her accusation, quote, "His eyes welled up with tears. In that moment, I was just another black woman, and he was just another white man who had walked through the door at the wrong time," unquote. What a power trip that must have been. All of the founders are committed radical feminists, not one of which would stoop to marry a black man. I was not the slightest bit surprised to learn this. But there's more. Recently, Kaylee Scales, managing director for the Black Lives Matter Global Network, has revealed that the organization is now peddling the white supremacy narrative, like every other obedient feminist organization. And I quote, "Black Lives Matter has become a cultural phenomenon since its inception in 2013 and has remained steadfast in its goals to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to end violence inflicted on black communities by the state and vigilantes." Not only does she suggest that the boogeyman of white supremacy is the prime threat to black communities, which is demonstrably false, she, like all other BLM leaders, utterly ignores the overwhelming threat of black-on-black crime and its link to fatherless families. This is feminism speaking. BLM's trickery may be fooling white America, but it is not fooling everyone in the black community. This video shows an angry black woman telling BLM to F off because she lost her 4-year-old son, her brother, and her male partner to black-on-black violence.
I don't support the Black Lives Matter movement. At the end of the day, you know how many black people voted for Donald Trump? You don't like I say, get off my page. You come all the way to my page, out of here. I had to bury my son because of black-on-black crime. 4 years old. I had to bury my man because of black-on-black crime. I had to bury my brother because of black-on-black crime. Your Black Lives Matter. Respect the badge. The police tell you get on the ground, you lay on the ground. Respect the badge. That's the problem. Ain't no order in this world. You and your Black Lives Matter. All lives matter.
The Black Lives Matter website makes it clear that it is a feminist organization through to the core, with all of its language and beliefs lifted straight from ideological feminism. Here are some quotes from their website. "We build a space that affirms black women and is free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered." And another quote, "As a network, we have always recognized the need to center the leadership of women and queer and trans people," unquote. That BLM explicitly excludes black men, the group suffering most in the U.S., from its consideration is at once despicable and revealing. Black men are worthless to BLM while alive, but BLM are happy to feed off their corpses once dead, demonstrating that they are first and foremost a feminist group, not a black group. And there's much more evidence of deceit in BLM. There's no recognition of the epidemic of father absence, high black incarceration rates, black-on-black crime, the single mother epidemic that is one of the most significant factors influencing negative outcomes for black people, or in fact anything other than boilerplate feminist propaganda on their site. Paul Elam and others are exactly right when they say that the best thing that America could do for its black citizens is to, quote, restore fathers and the father's authority in the black family, unquote. But BLM opposes this, as their website demonstrates with full feminist pride. Quote, we disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable, unquote. This is a clear commitment to keep men out of the family, which will help perpetuate the very problems that these feminists pretend to want to address. Warren Farrell has, of course, written extensively on this subject in his books, and it is well known that the majority of men in prison come from fatherless homes. BLM is not only silent on the issues facing black men, but the one thing that actually might help black men, the nuclear family, they have targeted for destruction. I refer to all leftist groups, like BLM, as feminist groups because feminism, not Marxism, is the logos that dominates the Western landscape and is the mother, the guiding ideology, and the religion of so many other active leftist groups in the West. The single common thread through every feminist group is their insistence that whiteness is the problem. They claim that white supremacy is at the root of every problem they identify. They claim that every white person has both white privilege and white guilt. They have made whiteness the original sin, a sin for which you can never be forgiven, but for which you must constantly atone. And of course, white men are the largest sinners of all. This is racism and bigotry in no uncertain terms. No amount of contrition can cleanse you of your whiteness. No amount of compensation will ever be enough for your crime of being born. The accusations are flying in from every corner of our culture. In the past few weeks, I have been accused of being a white supremacist, a bigot, a racist, of living on stolen lands, of treating Native Americans like crap, and more. All because I am white and I am critical of BLM and feminism. These three women who founded BLM are best understood as mafia bosses. They feed off of the violence created and suffered by their foot soldiers, the gang members, thugs, thieves, their own brothers and sons, and innocent black men alike. And they have no intention of allowing that to change by allowing the truth to surface. They feed off of the chaos that they help create, a chaos that virtually guarantees a future supply of black men will be killed as police confront them committing a crime. The rest of this discussion will deal with the method behind the chaos. In an ordered, stable world, you would have to work your way up to any sort of position of power, influence, or privilege. An ordered world is a world of merit, whereas in a world of chaos, one can manipulate, steal, or loot power and goods without earning it. Jordan Peterson said that, symbolically, masculinity is order and femininity is chaos, and he was drawing upon the Taoist idea that the world is made out of chaos and order, a very useful observation. Peterson describes the female as the attractor and chooser, and I will comment on how this creates chaos shortly, in the human mating dance when he wrote, quote, chaos, the eternal feminine, is also the crushing force of sexual selection. Women are choosy maters. Most men do not meet female human standards, unquote. All of my life I've watched and seen women manipulate men into conflict, They do it by crying victim and accusing a man or men of some injury, injustice, or conflict, after which they sit back and watch the fights that ensue. I've seen women flirt with 2 or more men, implying to each one of them that the other is standing in the way of her being with him, or suggesting that the other has injured or insulted her, only to watch the men fight over her or on her behalf. I even had to stop one such fight in my first year at university by explaining to each man how they had both been manipulated by the same girl who took pleasure out of their pain. I had a girlfriend bring me to her, quote, friend's house who, unbeknownst to me, just happened to be a drug dealer who threatened my life while there. She was fully aware that I would be a target while she would be safe, and she later callously dismissed my concern as meaningless. She was not impressed. She expected a fight. Women can be quite cavalier at shaming, dragging, or pushing a man into a dangerous situation that he would rather avoid, as we saw clearly with the white feather program of World War I. And some women of all races in the housing projects will use similar tricks against their would-be suitors, boyfriends, or even their own sons. This female power comes from their natural role as attractor and chooser. More on this in a moment. As some have pointed out, women have a propensity for stirring up a fight and then waiting at the finish line to mate with the victors. Evidence of this is plentiful in history. Men maimed in World War I were callously rejected as damaged goods by the same women who shamed them into fighting in the first place. In The Myth of Male Power, Warren Farrell discusses the example of women whose men were literally split in 2 by the axes of conquering Vikings, quickly fell in love with and married the conquerors. It is a pattern so deep that it can only be understood as rooted in biology, which might explain why feminists insist upon social constructionism, which can be twisted into a defense of any behavior over biology. It is part of the smoke and mirrors they use to conceal their role in creating the chaos from which they can loot. Thomas Berry talked about the importance of a functional cosmology. One biographer explained it like this. Berry's, quote, concern was that we had lost emotional, affective connection with the processes of life embedded in the emergence of the cosmos itself. In the past, connection with these vital processes enabled a people and their cultural traditions to function so that they knew the deeper meaning of their life and work, unquote. Our traditional stories are failing us, and we have not yet distilled our new understanding of the universe, derived from hundreds of years of scientific study, into a story capable of giving meaning and guidance to our individual and collective lives. The biographer continues, quote, for Thomas, then, contemporary humans are in between stories. That is, we have lost our connection to traditional cosmologies, and we have been unable to weave a functional cosmology from our collective scientific data, unquote. Peterson also emphasizes that human beings are story-driven and that we understand our world mostly in terms of the characters who play roles in our story. Nature abhors a vacuum, and other ideologies like environmentalism and feminism have swept in to provide meaning to the lives of people who otherwise would feel rudderless and adrift. But the cosmology of feminism is dysfunctional. It is small, petty, self-serving, deceitful, and hateful. It is a story of men perpetually oppressing women, thereby encouraging women to revel in the role of victim, forever seething in anger and seeking sympathy and compensation for their imagined, unjust treatment. Although it produces both order and chaos, the chaos that it creates is violent and remorselessly destructive, not creative. And the order that it imposes is necessarily a rigid, totalitarian enforcement of its ideology, since any serious inquiry into its premises will result in the collapse of the entire edifice. Therefore, no dissent, however tiny, is tolerated. It is crushing and nihilistic. Feminism, staring backwards upon a corrupt past that never existed except in their own murderously envious imagination, turns the human psyche into a pillar of salt, a fate suffered by Lot's wife for similar reasons. A healthy community that values human individuality, diversity of opinion, and liberty will live in a kind of creative disequilibrium, with order and chaos coexisting in tensions that resolve themselves peaceably. Insight and invention will arise out of the chaotic creative minds of those who are supported by an ordered world informed by the wisdom of its functional cosmology. And a functional cosmology must be consistent with our understanding of the universe, which implies an equal and positive role for all inhabitants within its overarching story. None of that is possible with feminism, which has conquered the Western world and imposed its ideology as the overarching guiding story of the entire Western world. That makes this cultural moment particularly dangerous. These feminist movements cannot nurture the human soul, effectively inform its adherents on their relationship with the universe or God, nor guide a culture to health and prosperity. Its adherents have no chance of enlightenment, or becoming one with God, if you will, since they have committed themselves to a life of deceit and hatred. Their own deceitfulness and descent into hatred will be their undoing, but they will cause incalculable suffering along the way.
Knock his motherfucking ass out. Black Lives Matter, you faggot. Running your mouth, get you fucked up,
do not protest against Black Lives.
Black men are nothing more than the bait that BLM use. These men are unaware and unlikely ever to become aware of the source of the chaos that controls their lives, the women in their lives. They are pushed out of family life by their mothers and or their girlfriends. They are taunted and manipulated into doing their woman's bidding. They are whipped into a rage by claims that their father was a bum, that the white man's racism caused this, or that the system is stacked against them. And the resulting aimless, reckless rage only waits for an excuse to explode, as we have seen with the young man who impulsively assaulted a 92-year-old woman just because she was white. These men see the women in their community rewarding thugs who bring money and gifts, and they are ridiculed by these same women for not bringing the goods home. BLM has no intention of helping these men. The feminist leaders of BLM are very intelligent women. They see the potential for chaos in all of this, and they encourage it. They deceitfully promote the feminist lies of white supremacy and racism against blacks, while diverting attention away from the problem of fatherless families and gang culture. Even though the most brutalized and downtrodden among the black community are cisgendered straight men, BLM, like good devout feminists, explicitly marginalizes that exact group. I reread the same quote from BLM website, which makes this crystal clear, and it's worth repeating. Quote, "We build a space that affirms black women and is free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered." Unquote. And the other quote, "As a network, we have always recognized the need to center the leadership of women and queer and trans people." Unquote. The black man is only a pawn to BLM. He is wound up, abandoned, and left to explode. And his explosion is exploited for fundraising. Poor black men are often destroyed by the chaos created by the women in their lives who escape unscathed. The kingpin, master destroyers are none other than the likes of these women who founded Black Lives Matter. Feminists who spin a web of lies, inciting anger and hatred. They watch as the men they manipulate riot, rage, and loot petty goods in their name, while they, the feminists and leaders of BLM at the top of the food chain, loot our culture of billions of dollars, secure high-status positions in the priesthood of feminism, and seats at all of the tables of power throughout our culture. All of this loot and power was made possible by the chaos that they instinctively created. The chaos created by Black Lives Matter and feminism in general is best understood as very sophisticated looting.